Well, welcome everyone. You should be able to unmute yourselves and say hello if you would like. Hello, John. Hello, Daniel. Morgan. I can see you there. Good to meet you, Anne. Hello, Richard.
Howdy.
Hello, Ben. Long time. Dave Quack. I've not met you yet, but hello. Good to meet you.
Hello.
I'm just going to wait a few more moments. There's
What is that?
just a bit of distortion from Anne, I think. So, Anne, good to meet you. And I've just muted you for the sake of everyone. We'll start shortly. I think there's around 20 people that have registered. So there's 14 of us at the moment. So I'll just give it a couple more moments. And I'm pleased that I recognize many of you on this call. So many which I've seen recently. So welcome, guys. In case you don't know who I am, my name's Phil. I'm part of the mission engagement team here at Carinity, and my colleague Claude, who's going to wave, is also joining me. Between us, we form the sort of mission engagement team for community development and youth here at Carinity. And one of the parts of the roles that Claude and I do is oversee the Collaborative Community Projects grant, which you've obviously tuned in for today. And I'll be explaining a bit more about as we open up. The main grant round will be opening soon in June, but there'll also be a small grant round opening in September this year. And the point of this webinar really is just to kind of elaborate a bit more on the funding guidelines which are available online, but also to help you secure a grant starting from early next year for your project. And so there will be time for questions at the end. And I'm probably going to speak for about 20-25 minutes. So if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and Claude can respond, or just save them for the end and we'll go through there. So good. All right. Well, I might make a start. I might just open in prayer and then we'll get cracking. So Heavenly Father, thank you for every church that's represented here today who are seeking discernment and wisdom on applying for the grants under the Collaborative Community Projects Grant Programme here at Carinity. We thank you, Lord, that their hearts are for you and for serving their local communities, Lord. And we just want to pray for all of those who are experiencing disadvantage in and around our church networks around the state, Lord. We recognize there are many needs, Lord, and there are limited resources. And so we pray, Lord, as we go through this presentation, Lord, may you illuminate by your Spirit clarity in people's hearts as they consider what it might be that you're prompting them to apply for, how a project could look, and how we can actually create sustainable and sustainable transformation in people's lives in the local neighborhoods where each of these guys are based. So we pray all these things in your precious name. Amen. All right. So hopefully you should be able to see my screen. As I said, my name's Phil and my colleague Claude. We're happy to help at any point in this stage of the application process that you might be considering applying for. So keep that in mind as we go through. We're here to be friendly faces. We're part of the QB family and we want you guys to succeed. And so I'm going to just go through a few slides, which will help you hopefully to get more of an overview of what we can do to support you guys. Now, last year, I did 3 of these webinars listed under these 3 categories here. The first one was around articulating organizational strategy, particularly for churches that are considering going down the pathway of designing a project. This is often a missed step. Often they're good at, churches are good at articulating the why, your vision and your mission, but actually articulating the how you do things is actually a really important part of what it means to actually deliver a project in your local community as well. And the second webinar I did last year was around designing transformational projects and specifically what it means to design meaningful measures of success as it relates to a transformational project. And then the third webinar I did was essentially this webinar I'm doing now, and this is kind of a refresher of last year. So for those of you who joined last year, apologies if there'll be some similar content, but there will be a lot of new information that will be very relevant for this year specifically, which I'll be sharing, and also a bit about the small grants program as well. So But I'd invite you, if you haven't already, to jump online and check out the other two webinars, which I did last year on the Carinity website, because that will really set you up well to actually design and articulate a project that's going to have success through this grant round. All right, well, just to give you a bit of a background to the fund. Now, Carinity has always had a goal to offer services that make a real difference in people's lives. Traditionally, that's been through things such as residential aged care, of which we've got 11 sites now across the state, but also in retirement villages, of which we've got 10, through our home care program. We've got around 1,200 clients, I believe, and also through 6 special assistance schools, the chaplaincy program of which myself and Claude oversee as part of our roles as well. But there's also a bunch of things like community services and accommodation for youth at risk, experiencing homelessness, counselling services, disability services. So Carinity is a very large body, but the focus hasn't changed since its genesis. And a big reason why both Claude and I have been employed in this last year and a half or so has been aimed at supporting you guys, specifically the church, with the necessary tools, not only to connect, but also to equip and empower the people that you're seeking to serve, particularly those who are doing life tough in your local communities. And so we really want to see you guys thrive, but more importantly, we want to see leaders in your community step up and lead transformation as well. And if you think about Jesus' approach to discipleship, he went and met the people who are most vulnerable in their community and often used them as the leaders for change across where he was ministering. And so some of the objectives of the fundings, like I said, it's to facilitate those partnerships with you, and that's been a big part of the sort of vision of this grant round for a number of years. We want Carinity and under that sort of QB movement banner to be in a close relationship with you guys. And so the way we want to do that is to fund community projects that are sustainable, creative, collaborative, and community informed. Now, you might be wondering what a sustainable project actually looks like. Another way to say this could be, what's your exit strategy for your project that you're thinking of submitting? It could simply be a buy-in from your church that has an increased sort of increment of support financially over the term of the project that you submit. It could be that you get buy-in from another organization that supports your project into the long term. A good example of this, we've got a church that we support down on the Gold Coast who with grant funding, and they applied for a community chaplain, for a support for a community chaplain a few years ago, because the club that's opposite them actually asked if they could have a chaplain to come support them, and they were like, sure. So they applied to us for funding, and now 2 years on, the chaplains had such an effect into the culture of the club there that the club now want to fully fund that chaplain ongoing as a staff member, and the church and us can just step back. So there's a good example of what it means to sort of build sustainability into the area of your focus as a project. Another example could be that you want to do a community garden project, and that attracts local council funding over a period of 3 years, which means then that the initiative keeps going without need support from Carinity or from the church. So it's those kind of ideas, those kind of examples, which are good examples of what it means to create a sustainable project. Remain compliant with our PBI status with the ACNC. There are 3 broad areas of focus for your project that will need to be submitted. This is around relieving and mitigating disadvantage, promoting connectivity for vulnerable people, and increasing the strength of local neighbourhoods against disadvantage. These are 3 quite broad areas, and there's a number of different people groups there listed who could potentially be people that experience disadvantage, but that's not an exhaustive list. There's a reason now that we've put that other category in there. What the main thing to remember is that both your title of your project and your project summary should easily be able to fit into one of these 3 areas. In other words, it shouldn't explicitly be, say, kingdom-based activities for churchgoers, for example, because that wouldn't necessarily apply to our PBI focus areas, and so it wouldn't be eligible. But that doesn't mean that your projects won't have churchgoers or kingdom builders in them. But for compliance purposes, ensuring alignment in this area is important. Okay, so in terms of the funding purpose, and if you're any doubt of our intent as Carinity, I'm just going to read this out. The purpose of Carinity's collaborative community projects is to facilitate partnerships with QB churches that increase their fruitfulness for the kingdom of God. So yes, we've got to comply with our PBI, but our heart is very much around building disciples with you guys. We do this by equipping QB churches to build transformation pathways that support disadvantaged people groups to become catalysts of change in their neighborhoods. And so a big part of what we're trying to achieve across this transformation pathway here is to help you guys not only connect meaningfully into your community through your projects, but also to move you along that transformation pathway as well. So how can we get you guys to, or how can we help you guys to design a project that's not only going to help you connect with your local community, but to help them contribute into the life of the church? One of the things I often say to church leaders like yourselves who've been maybe doing ministry for a while with people doing life tough is that how can you move people away from that perspective of that this ministry is here for me, to moving them to a space where saying that I'm here for this ministry, whether they're Christians or not, because ultimately that's where the transformation starts to take place, where people feel like they've got something of value to contribute, where they can express their gifts and apply their strengths in certain ways. These are the kinds of contributions that ultimately have an impact for the kingdom when you're doing this kind of work with disadvantaged people groups. So collaboration is a big key part of this grant round, and so we encourage you to try and at least meet 2 of these different 4 categories. And I realize that some of you may not be, and some of you who are joining online on the recording might not necessarily be a Baptist church, but you have a strong link to a Baptist church. Make sure you've got their buy-in early on. We have had an application last year in the main grant round, which got really far along and was actually approved. But when it came to the actual point of actually implementing it, the missions committee team essentially just backed out and said, I don't think this project's for us now. And so make sure you've got early buy-in from your congregation and also your church leaders as well for any project that you do submit, because it could cost a lot of time and energy down the line. If you've got a collaboration opportunity with Carinity in your area, then we strongly encourage you to do that as well. I know, for example, Liberty Church down the Gold Coast shares a site with one of our residential aged cares. It could be that starting a community meal, for example, in that situation could be a good example of trying to overcome social isolation for people who are experiencing disadvantage. In other words, people who are elderly in their community. And so this is a good example of how it could be an easy way for a church like Liberty to collaborate with Carinity in a very straightforward way. And for the other 2 categories, in terms of members of the local community and local community partners and organizations, if you can provide evidence that you've done a degree of consultation and research to demonstrate that this is an important project, not just for the church, but for local community members as well, that will certainly be considered favorable in any application that's made. You know, how thinking about questions like, you know, what's been their feedback on your project? How will they be involved, and what do they think are the priorities as it relates to the needs in your local community? One of the questions we added to the application process last year, which is also trying to speak to this, is how have the project beneficiaries been involved in the design of your project? This might not always be feasible or realistic, but if there is a voice of those who've been doing life tough in your community into the design of your project, again, that will be considered very favorably when it comes to the assessment process. So just to give you a few outlines for this funding grant round, as you know, we're going to be opening the main grant round on the 2nd of June, and that'll be for the month of June. And grants will be available between the range of 5,000 and 50,000 per year for up to 3 years. Now, the small grant round will open the 1st of September through to the 30th, and that'll be for projects up to 5,000 a year. Now, I should let you know, now this is kind of unique for this year, that the funding pool next year, typically we have $500,000 every year. But because we've had a number of multi-year projects that have been successful over the last 2-3 years, the grant pool available now for next year, in other words, if you were to apply in the main grant round, the first year of funding available for everyone is going to be 230,000, because that 270 of that 500 has already been committed next year. So that should be helpful information for you guys thinking about, okay, what level of funding should I be applying for? Keep in mind that last year we had 8 main grant applications approved. And so if you were to take that 230,000 now, that's roughly 30,000 each project on average. And so if you're thinking of applying for a project around the $50,000 mark a year, just make sure you've had a good chat with us and that you've got a very strong application in mind that's got very well-grounded research with other organizations involved, and it's considered very collaborative and all the points I've just mentioned. And there is a question in the application as well, which is probably worth keeping in mind, that if you are applying for more than that sort of 20, 30,000 mark, will you proceed with this project if you don't receive full funding from us? Now, if the answer is no, that's helpful for us. That's helpful information for us when it comes to the assessment time, because our panel will assume that unless it's fully funded, the project won't continue. But if there is a degree of flexibility, for example, you'll employ someone 1 day a week rather than 2 days a week, then make sure you mention that in the application as well, because that'll give some flexibility if there is a high degree of high quality applications. That'll encourage our assessment team to think, okay, maybe we'll reduce the amount that we can allocate in this instance, because ultimately we want all of you guys to be doing projects in this coming year. Match funding as well is considered favorably. So if you're applying for a $10,000 project, having a $10,000 match from your church to demonstrate that you're committed to this project as well will be considered favorably. We will consider in-kind volunteer work contributions as well. And particularly if you've got a strong volunteer base who are behind you, you can allocate a $20 an hour sort of contribution for their work over the course of the project life. And so that will be considered, but it will be considered less favorably compared to financial contributions. So like I said, we're likely expecting a high volume of applicants this year compared to last year. And so anything you can do to make your application look stronger in the face of competition will be worth considering. Okay, just to go through the application process a bit. If you haven't already spoken to myself or Claude around a possible project application idea, then I'd recommend doing that first. It's actually a requirement of the application process now. Just to give you an indication for both the small grants and the main grants that were approved last year, every one of them had a conversation with us at some point or another. In other words, there was a 100% success rate for those churches that had made the intentional approach to us to talk through their project. And so there's no guarantee that will happen this year, because like I said, we're expecting a high level of applicants this year, but it should give you an idea that ultimately we're trying to seek a partnership. And so if we can support you to design a proposal that's going to be successful, then that's in your favor. Applications open on the 2nd of June, 1st of September for the small grants round. You can apply through the link that will be found on the Carinity page from the 2nd of June. And it's a very simple online application process. You just need to register your church if you hadn't already done so. And you can always ask us for questions if you're having trouble accessing the site for whatever reason. Applications for the main grant will close on the 30th of June, and then 30th of September, the small grants round. And successful applications in the main grant round will be notified in that first week in August, and then the first week in October for the small grants round. All right, so what to include in your application? In all of the applicants, whether you're a small grant applicant or the main grant applicant, you'll need to submit some kind of budget. You can use the online template. You're also welcome to submit an Excel or a larger budget that's part of a larger project. For example, if you're looking to fund a component of an existing project, that's also fine. If you apply for the main grant round, you'll be expected to submit a project plan. And there's a template available in Excel or Word that's on the second page of the application. So once you've done your contact details, the first thing you're encouraged to do is to design your project plan. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But one of the things to make sure you do on that is to be really explicit with your SMART indicators. If you're not sure what SMART indicators are, I'd recommend you go to that Designing Transformational Projects webinar that I did last year. The other thing you'll need to include is a letter from your church council acknowledging the commitment to the project as well. So this can be whoever approves or signs off on expenditure in your church as well. So it could be the treasurer. But those two things, particularly your budget and your project plan, are really essential to be included in your application. And and your letter from your church as well. If you don't have a letter, it'll bounce. So this is an example of the project plan template. Now, I've put heaps of examples in there of what it'll look like. Don't leave those in there as part of your application because it's a bit confusing. Just remove anything that isn't relevant. Like I said, there's examples in here, but there's also heaps of examples of what to include, particularly under that second column, in terms of smart indicators, because that's really the goal of what transformation is going to look like. It's easy to articulate outputs such as, the trainings you do or the number of meals you do, but actually understanding the behavior change of what is going on in people's lives and seeking to measure that is the sort of indicators which will prove successful when it comes to the assessment time from the panel. Like I said, if you're not sure, there's guidance notes in the application, and again, feel free to reach out to myself or Claude to talk through what an indicator could look like with reference to your project. So yeah, like I said, jump onto that webinar online if you're not sure, because that'll elaborate a lot more in terms of what it means to articulate a meaningful measure of success. Some of the favorable features we're looking for, the more creative, the better, particularly if it's got scope to be replicated elsewhere. I've already talked about the links with Carinity and being well researched and collaborative with other organizations. Probably the zenith of these 4 favorable features for me, at least, is if you've got a church strategy that you've articulated in a one-pager and you submit that and can demonstrate how the project is really clearly aligned with your strategic priorities of the church, that'll be a huge win, because I've not yet seen that done by a church, even though I know some churches have strategies in place. But if you can clearly show how not only is this project important for us as a church, but it's completely aligned with the vision, the mission, and the strategy of us as a church, that's had buy-in from the congregation, I'll applaud that, because that for me is showing a really clear intent in the way that you've not only done your research in your community, but also with your congregation as well. And similarly, if your proposals apply participatory strengths-based or asset-based community development principles, that'll be another good indicator for us and as part of the assessment panels to show that you're thinking more broadly than benevolence. You're actually thinking about transformation in people's lives. You're looking at ways that you can seek to bring people who've been doing life tough on a journey with you and seeking to empower and grow them into the leaders of change that you want to see as well. So they're certainly going to be considered favorable features this year. Less favorable features, projects that are submitted specifically for capital items. That doesn't mean capital items can't be funded. They have been in the past. You might already have an existing ministry, such as a community meal, for example, and you're looking to expand its capacity to host other guests. And so you might decide to apply for a grant for kitchen facilities or an upgrade to your kitchen facilities. That's, we've approved grants like that in the past. So keep that in mind. But like I said, given the nature of the competitiveness of the round that it's becoming, those specifically just for capital items will be considered less favorably. Also, if you've received funding in the past, that doesn't rule you out. Also, particularly if you've had a small grant in the last year, I'm encouraging all our churches who have applied for small grants funding to consider it like a kind of a pilot. If it's clear that things are going well after a year of having small grant funding, then apply for the main grant, because it's a great way to be able to demonstrate learning from your small grant round, to be able to say, yeah, this is actually a go for us, and this is going to be a great way we can seek transformation and apply for 3 years of funding, or like a phase 2 of the project. So that builds on the success of the previous one. Yeah, so whether you've applied previously or not, well, it's only going to be one part of the assessment criteria that we're assessing. And so don't let it rule you out if you've already had funding from us previously. If you're a small church and you haven't got much money, but you've got a big vision and a big buy-in from your local community for the project that you want to do, don't feel as if not having the money is going to rule you out. It might be that the small grants round is a way to dip your toe into this sort of grant round rather than the main grant round, because that might then give you the credibility when you're applying for funding without having much match funding, for example, to be able to be successful in the future. All right. So each each half year we have a reporting process for you guys to complete, and so it's a pretty straightforward online part of the in the same place that you would log in into the application process. There's going to be a reporting process to complete in that same portal. That is due on the 31st of June for the first 6 months of the year, and then your annual report's due on the 31st of January. It used to be on the 31st of December, but I thought that was so mean for pastors who are, especially solo pastors who are trying to do all their Christmas services. So I pushed it back to the end of January. Each financial acquittal statement needs to be signed by a pastor and the church treasurer, verifying that the funds have been used in accordance with the project budget. If you haven't, or if you found that the project has changed over the course of the year, and you're going to be reporting against elements of your budget which don't make sense anymore because you've decided to prioritize something else, then please speak to us before you allocate that funds, because it might be that you need to put a variation request in. And so we had a number of churches submit variation requests, that were approved. And for example, they think, we were going to prioritize these activities, but actually, it's been clear that, the resources need to be over here instead. That's a simple process to undertake. You just fill out this online form, and it just goes as an addendum to your application, so that you're going to be reporting against line items that make sense. If you're applying under the main grant rounds, there'll also be an annual review that needs to be completed as part of your annual report. And I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. It's essentially a larger version of your project plan, those two blue columns. It's essentially just measuring your achievements to date in the quarter or the year that you're doing the application on. That you're doing the project in. And so it's measuring success specifically and your achievements against those different columns. So your smart indicators, your different baselines, and just writing comments. So it helps us to understand where you're seeing opportunities for growth, or maybe areas that need to improve, or areas where you're going great guns and actually being able to allocate resources elsewhere. So you'll submit that as part of your annual report only on the 31st of January, not on your 6-month report. Just to give a slide here on the small grants round, which will open in September. As I said, this was only piloted last year to utilize an underspend we had from the main grant round. And it's designed to support churches with grants of up to £5,000 for 1 year. There's no project plan needed in that small grants round, so it's a lot less onerous as an application process. I should let you know, though, that it may not go ahead later this year if there's insufficient grant funds remaining after this main grant round allocation in June. So keep that in mind. We want to prioritize the main grant round. And so there's no guarantee that there will be a small grants round later in the year if we have a lot of strong applications that utilize that 230,000 or so. So keep that in mind if you're joining us with a small grant in mind. Okay, just to wrap this up, make sure, if you haven't already, to review the online webinars, the first two, which were around articulating strategy and designing transformational projects. That will really set you up well if you're thinking of applying this year. Anything you can demonstrate in your application process that shows that you've collaborated well with your local community and other organizations is important. It's not essential, but will certainly make your application stronger. And prioritize articulating your project plan well in the application, because if you don't do that, it's clear that often it's tempting often to then use your application to sort of elaborate on a lot of detail, and it doesn't actually serve you very well or help you articulate a project very clearly, because ultimately what we're going to be measuring success against is the project plan. So make sure you articulate that well. And like I said, reach out to us if you're not sure. Main grant round opens in a week or so, and just keep in mind we're here to help. Myself and Claude, we want you to succeed. This is something. This is a grant round that has been developed with QB churches in mind specifically, and so it's not like you're applying to, if you've ever applied for a council grant or a tender with government before, where it's often quite impersonal and hard to get the information you need when you're trying to do an application. And so that's the opposite for us. We want you to feel very open to be able to reach out to us and ask questions, and we can provide feedback on some of the content that you might have already started as well. So keep that in mind as well. All right, well, we'll move to a time of questions. And perhaps if you just illuminate or put your hand up, or you might be able to unmute as a means to ask a question, then feel free to do so. And me and Claude can see to do that. Maybe I'll just stop sharing my screen as well. Any questions from anyone?
Phil, mine's quite simple. When it's 50,000 and you say over 3 years, do you mean 50 divided by 3 or 50 for 3 years, one each year?
Yeah, good question. And sorry I didn't clarify as well as I could have in what I just shared. It's for projects, you can apply up to 50,000 each year. So theoretically, you could submit a project this year for over 3 years, 150,000. So that's, and we have had a couple of projects, I think, or definitely one project last year that was approved for that amount. So it's not impossible, but like I said, if you're going to do that this year, just make sure it's a very strong application given the limited resources compared to the previous year where we had another 130,000 available.
Thank you.
I guess I saw a notification pop up there for was that you, Tyler? Did you want to share verbally? I can't hear you, T. Do you want to? You might need to unmute yourself.
I think it's unmuted. Maybe you're having trouble with your sound. I'll read it out to you if you like.
Okay.
Do
All right,
you have an
thanks,
example of what you're looking for when projects align with church vision, mission, and goals?
Well, let's say you, and having been to Agnes Water recently, I appreciate your question. Let's say your church has articulated a strategic priority on discipleship or reaching the lost. It might be that under the discipleship framework of that strategic priority, that you undertake something like a community meal. And a big part of that community meal is to grow disciples. You want to see people express their gifts in certain ways. You want to have people that come alongside them in specific ways. And if you can link that back to what the vision and the mission, and particularly the strategy of the church is trying to do, and you've got buy-in from the church for that, then that will be considered gold from the assessment panel's perspective. It shows that you're thinking bigger picture rather than just project specific. Yeah. Good. Anyone else? I noticed that there's note takers in here, and I'm wondering if that's like people who've included their AI component in there as well. I've never seen that. It says fireflies, but there's someone, I think there's a guy called Troy here as well. He's got a note taker as well, which is interesting. Anyone else?
Philip.
Oh,
well, who was that?
See.
Someone just got in.
I got David Quack popped up. Do you want to go first, Dave?
I was just wondering, so say as part of the course, as part of the funding, you develop something that then later is sold, on-sold or reproduced that then generates finances. Is there any like guidelines on whether that then goes back to the church, to Carinity? Is there anything around that? So if the initiative generates income, is that a problem?
Not necessarily, no. And in fact, one of the indicators we seek to try and measure as from a success point of view is that any projects that we fund then go on to be self-sustaining or go on to equip leaders to the point where they're actually running with projects in their own regard as well. And so there's nothing wrong with that as long as the project is designed in a way that is seeking to support people experiencing disadvantage in your community. If you grow them into leaders, which then go on to run with their own projects that generate income, then great.
Yeah, cool. Because that's what I thought. I thought that was like a positive thing, but I've never gotten a grant in the sense of this before, so I don't know. I got one of your $5,000 ones, and for anyone listening, if you haven't had a go of those, they're such a good learning experience to how to go about getting the grants. Okay, cool. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Yeah. No, thanks, Dave. Was there someone else who wanted to ask a question as well?
Yeah, Philip, Rob Rogers from Agnes Water. How you going?
Hey, Rob, good to hear you.
Yeah, mate, you mentioned that sort of dipping one's toe in with the small grant, as a useful learning experience. But then you also mentioned, grants that are less favourably looked at if they've received a grant before. So if one goes, to the small grant uh, pathway, and then decides to apply for the larger grant down the road, is that a bad move? Because you said it was probably a favourable move.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a confusing bit of language I did there. If it's clear that the small grant that you've applied for has got some clear learnings that are going to be really relevant to expanding into the main grant round, then that will certainly be considered favourably. If you've applied for a small grant and it hasn't gone well, and then you apply for the main grant in a completely different direction, that's maybe separate to what you'd apply for in the small grant, then that will be taken into consideration. It's because we want to support as many new churches as we can down the track. And so I guess my recommendation is, if you are going to apply for a small grant, be considering in advance what the expanded version of that might be, because certainly we want to build sustainability into any community endeavors that you undertake. And the small grant round is specifically designed for being able to dip your toe in and not really being sure whether it's going to be successful or not. But my encouragement is to apply for the main grant round this year, regardless. If you've got a clear set of priorities and you've got buy-in from your community, just go straight into the main grant round, because we've also had applicants who've then gone on to do a phase 2 in the main grant round as well. So if you've had 3 years of funding, that doesn't really rule you out from getting another 3 years of funding if there's a clear way to expand and develop your main grant round project.
Thanks, mate.
Phil, Daniel Pappas had a question that I did answer in the chat, but if you're like me, I don't normally read the chat.
All right. Yeah,
and it said,
helpful.
can you make more than one? Oh, it went away, but can you make more than one? Apply for more than one grant at a time, like if you have a few initiatives.
You could, in theory, do multiple applications. Yes, I think the grant software does allow to do that. We've not had it from anyone before, but I would, like I said, encourage you to focus specifically on one and do that really well, considering how competitive the grant round is. It also brings clarity in terms of what your church buy-in is for a specific project as well, particularly if it's a larger grant.
I actually put in the answer because I read the question a little differently. We will only approve one grant though. So if you put a few grants in for different initiatives, you will only get approved for one grant at that time. So we won't give you a few grants.
Correct.
But as soon as one grant ends, you can apply for another one.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Any other feedback, questions? Is that a question from Ben?
Oh, Tyler's got another one. I haven't read it yet, but it says, what weight are you placing on other community or organisation collaborations, or are you looking for church collab mainly?
If there's a strong collaboration with organisations with your church, that'll be considered favourably. It's the Collaborative Community Projects Grant. We want churches to be in strong links with their local organisations. And just thinking about your organisation, Chappie House, Tyler, that's a perfect example. The more the church is bought into the vision and mission, say, of another organisation outside of the church world, but that has a vested interest in supporting the church and the outworkings of a project that you apply for, the better. The main thing is that any applications that are made to the Collaborative Community Projects Grant, it needs to be the church applying for funding for their local work. And so if it's an organisation which has a strong affiliation with the Queensland Baptist Church, that's also okay. But if it's not specifically affiliated to the QB movement, then that organisation shouldn't be applying for funding, if that makes sense. All right. Is there any other questions in the chat?
There's some questions in the chat. Ben has asked if local representatives also count towards community collaboration. Do they?
Yes, they
Yes.
do. Yeah, simple.
Yeah. And something we're looking for as well.
Sorry, did someone else?
Yeah.
Oh, has Tyler got another question there? Oh,
yeah, I got
Aaron's
a question, guys. Around like evidence stuff, if some of the stories that we have, when it comes to putting faces to names, and we're looking at like people in the vulnerable people space, how do you guys want that communicated when it comes like for evidence, that sort of stuff? Like if we've already been doing it, here are the stories, how do you want it articulated?
If you're sharing a story of transformation with us, which is what we'd encourage you to do at that sort of annual report stage, and it's actually a requirement of your reporting, I should have mentioned as well that you include at least one story of transformation. Feel free to put in a pseudonym or another person's name as a means to share that, just to protect the identity. If you do decide to share that person's identity, we do have permissions forms that you can sign with Carinity ones, basically giving that person can then sign to say they've given permission for their details to be shared or their name and their story to be shared with us.
Yeah, that's really helpful because like when it comes to qualitative and even anecdotal, like the anecdotal kind of stuff, like that's going to be how, like, will that be something that we look at later on in the reporting space? So like this is, because we can't go, here are the numbers, but these are the stories. Like, how do we approach that?
Yeah, so you can quantify those qualitative types of stories. For example, one of the measures of success in the project plan is stories of transformation. So you might be looking to try and acquire 5 stories of transformation of people who've, gone through your project and have seen a transformation in some way in their lives. To actually capture the qualitative nature of that, you might want to append in a report a detailed description and a photo of the person whose life's been transformed in some way.
Yeah, sure. And then so there's like guarantee of like if we are to share stories and photos, there are that extra layer of responsibility taken on by Carinity for the child safety.
Correct. Yeah, and that'll be something they'll need to. Yeah, so I can share that template with you if you like, which is
so that was
something
like, because obviously you got because we got layers for churches, but there is a second layer for Carinity.
Yeah, and there'll be expectations in line with our public engagement policy on how images are shared and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, phenomenal, great.
Cool. Good. Any other questions? That's good. You're a chatty bunch. I remember last year I did this. I don't think anyone asked any questions. All right. Well, we're pretty much bang on time, so we'll leave it there. If you've got any questions or things that are unanswered, please feel free to reach out to myself or Claude. Like I said, that link will become available to start your applications in the next week or so on the website. I'll send an email out when that goes live. Great to see you guys, and God bless your next step as part of your application. Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Peace.